The next thing we're going to cover is diseases. Now, you don't have to remember all the big scientific names and so on. I cannot even enunciate a lot of them. But you should know what disease is caused by a parasite, a bacteria, things of this sort. Um, and so you have bacterias, viruses, and parasites are your primaries. So we're going to cover these and what you're supposed to do when you do discover it and that kind of thing. Diseases of fish are usually resulting from one or more causes. External physical occurrences, improper handling of the fish before release, damage from terminal tackle, damage from trailing leader material, damage from boats, abandoned fishing nets, and such. Or from infectious agents, such as bacteria, fungi, viruses, or by invasion of parasites into the host fish. True or false? Fish can acquire damage from infectious agents such as bacteria, fungi, viruses, or by invasion of parasites into host fish. True. If any of that is missing, then it is false. Or it may say one of the components for an infectious agent is a bacteria. Okay, each test that you take from each region, from each ODR, there are several multiple different tests. These are picked randomly, and so it could have a number of different formulated way of saying something. You have to know the basics in order to answer that question. Okay, diseases caused by bacteria. Disease production or spread depends upon the host species susceptibility, the pathogen's virulence, and the host environmental conditions. So how virulent is it? How susceptible is the species to it? And does the environmental conditions accommodate for that particular disease or parasite? Furunculosis is characterized by signs such as external bleeding on the skin and fin base. Like over here. See? Skin and at the base of the fin. Boil-like furuncles will appear on the body as well. See here? Internal investigation would reveal a flaccid, inflamed intestinal tract. It starts tearing the internal tissues down. There are 4 different forms of this disease. So, furunculosis is characterized by external bleeding on the skin and fin base. Internal investigation would reveal a flaccid, inflamed intestinal tract. The 4 types is acute, subacute, chronic, and latent. An acute form, a sudden increase in mortality with few or no external growth symptoms. Subacute, a gradual increase in mortality with signs of furuncles and hemorrhages or external bleeding, as you see here. Chronic, a low but steady mortality with intestinal inflammation and various external lesions being visible. Latent form, no visible mortality rates in the species, however the pathogen is systematically present. In other words, here you would not see anything basically. But say you see a fish floating on the water with these symptoms, you may want to, while using gloves remove it, open it, and check the intestines. If you find all the symptoms, then you have a documentation of that disease. You may catch a fish that is alive and showing these same symptoms. All right? When you catch diseased fishes, they should not typically be returned to the water. You don't want to reintroduce that pathogen back into the water. It would depend upon the lake and the water permits, but typically catching something like this and removing it from the habitat and reporting it does not go against your catch count. Diseases caused by viruses, VHS. This is a prime example of VHS. However, some of this they look very similar between the furunculosis and the viral hemorrhaging. Okay? Viral hemorrhagic septicemia and infectious pancreatic necrosis. And IPN is infectious pancreatic necrosis. Are two well-noted viral diseases. VHS symptoms include lethargy in the fish, darkened skin, pale gills, bulging eyes, and a swollen, fluid-filled belly, ascites, with visible bleeding or hemorrhages around the eyes, gills, fins, plus erratic swimming, leading to rapid high mortality, especially in cooler waters, 14 degrees Celsius. You may get a question that asks, is VHS a virus or a bacteria? You may get it to go, the symptoms are this. It may go, what is the high mortality under exceptionally cooler or warmer waters? Any number of variations to these questions. Rainbow trout, young pike, and graylings are susceptible. Note as well that brown trout and whitefish are carriers of the virus. This means they have the virus in their systems but do not show symptoms. So it may go, rainbow trout and young pike are carriers of VHS, true or false. That would be false. Brown trout and whitefish are carriers of VHS, true. VHS is a parasite, a virus, a bacteria. It would be B, it's a virus. This is not answers to the questions. They're not going to be like, I'm simply giving you examples of how those questions could be, not this is, you're going to see this question and this is the answer. Don't take it that way. That's not what this is intended for. Now, VHS is a notifiable disease. You need to know this. VHS is a notifiable disease, which means you have to report it to the water leaseholder. If you find dead fish with the symptoms, if you catch fish with the symptoms, they must be documented, the data put down, the fish bagged and tagged, and reported. If that individual is not contactable, then notify the local police, who will then notify the appropriate authorities. Follow any instructions given, and under no circumstances dispose of the specimens into nature. Bag it and tag it and report it. Secure in a separate container for later proper disposal, or have ready, or to have ready usually when animal control or police show up to take possession of the possibly infected specimens for lab analysis. IPN symptoms include IPN in fish, especially salmonoids. These include darkened skin, swollen or distended abdomens, lethargy, loss of appetite, which you won't be able to tell from the fish, and abnormal, often spiral or corkscrewing swimming patterns. If you see a fish that's just sitting there going sort of real wonky in the water, semicircles, no orientation, and so on, it may have IPN. So swimming patterns with sudden high mortality in young fish. Grossly affected fish show hemorrhages in organs, pale liver or kidneys, and an empty gut with mucus, while internally the pancreas shows necrosis. Necrosis means it is a degradation or a slow rotting of the flesh, tissues, or in this case, the organ. The IPN virus usually causes mortality, death in fry fish. IPN usually causes mortality or death in fry fish. All types of salmonoids as well as pike fry are very susceptible to this disease. Mortality in fry can spike as high as 90% in some cases. This is need to know information. Positive diagnosis of bacterial and viral diseases on the basis of gross symptoms is usually not fully accurate in field conditions, as many of these fish pathogens can produce very similar results in the host. Like I was talking, the furunculosis and the VHS can produce very similar external symptoms. This is why you catalog, you bag, you tag, you report. They'll come, they'll pick it up, they'll tell you to drop it off somewhere, or they will tell you to drop it off somewhere so that they can do an analysis. Control of bacterial and viral diseases can usually be accomplished by a combination of preventative chemotherapeutic procedures. Preventive measures would include sanitation and the manipulation of environmental conditions. Maybe draining the water, opening the water, getting more water flow in, adding more oxygen to the water. Any number of things could be done depending upon what the situation is, what the environment is, and what the disease is. However, chemotherapy with the use of sulfamides, antibiotics, and nitrofurans has been ineffective in controlling viral diseases. Next, we cover fungus diseases. Spirulina. The primary characteristics or symptoms of a spirulina infection, spiruliginiosis, is the appearance of fuzzy, cotton wool-like patches on the skin, fins, gills, or eggs of freshwater fish. These lesions, which are initially white or gray, may turn brown or green as they trap mud, silt, or algae. This right here is prime examples of those. See how it looks all fuzzy? The physical signs and characteristics. Appearance of lesions. The most notable feature is the external circular or crescent-shaped growth that looks like tufts of cotton wool or matted slimy mass when the fish is removed from the water, like this here. Location. Infections typically start in areas with pre-existing injuries. Skin lesions are where the protective mucus layer has been compromised, such as the head, fins, or gills. This is why it is important to follow the rules for catching, measuring, sexing fish, so that if you have to return it, you've done the minimum amount of damage to that individual or its skin. This is why your leaders should always have a lower breaking tension, why your leaders should not be overly long. All of these can lead to damage of the fish and can lead to these diseases. Lesion progression. The lesions grow in radial extensions, can spread over a large portion of the body up to 80%, and eventually erode the epidermis and underlying muscle tissue, like this one here. Gill involvement. Infection of the gills leads to respiratory distress and failure due to impaired oxygen intake. Egg infections. On incubating eggs, Spirulina first attacks dead or injured eggs, then rapidly spreading to engulf healthy ones in a hatching unit. Behavioral and systematic symptoms. Infected fish also exhibit several behavioral and physiological changes as the disease progresses. Lethargy, fish become fatigued and less active. Erratic swimming, they may display abnormal swimming patterns, lose their balance, or swim near the surface of the water. A fish seen swimming at the surface of the water may not always be infected. It could just be due to the water temperature, the barometric pressure, and so on. But if that fish shows other symptoms, then you know what you're dealing with. Physical debilitation. Fish may show weight loss, sunken eyes, skin hemorrhagings, and fin rot. Physiological failure. In advanced stages, the destruction of skin tissue impairs osmoregulation or fluid balance, which can lead to death. See, these are infected gills. See the white material in there? Next is diseases caused by protozoans. Whirling disease. This is caused when a host worm is eaten by the fish. It then penetrates the fish's digestive wall, allowing the microbe to then infect the fish's head and spine gristle. In other words, they eat the parasite. What the parasite carries then taps through their abdominal walls and enters the nervous and spinal system, where it then does its damage. If the fry lives, it will have defined deformities. So, the younger the fish is, the more likely different deformities can be. They can survive through this, but those deformities are very prevalent at times and eventually leads to the fish being eaten by other fish, which they're consuming the parasite, and it starts the cycle again. Moxobolus cerebralis is a myoxosporine parasite of salmonoids. So Myoxobolus is a parasite of salmonoids and trout species. It causes whirling disease in farm salmon and trout, and is also in wild fish populations. It was first described in rainbow trout in Germany in 1893, but its range has spread and it has appeared in most of Europe, including Russia. In the 1980s, M. cerebralis was found to require a tubificid, a kind of segmented worm, to complete its life cycle. The parasite infects its host with its cells after piercing them with polar filaments ejected from nemocyst-like capsules. Think of it as a pustule, an encased capsule is a nemocyst. This infects the cartilage and possibly the nervous tissue of salmonoids, causing a potentially lethal infection in which the host develops a black tail, spinal deformities, and possibly more deformities in the interior part of the fish. You see this here.